When I was a little kid in the 80s and 90s, there was all sorts of different RPGs out there. There was the weird ones, the esoteric ones, the strange ones. And then there was also, the mainline Final Fantasies. But nowadays, all those kind of strange ones, they've been forgotten. Where have those series gone? That's what I want to talk about here today. Those old, abandoned, forgotten, defunct RPG series that need to come back, because now we're in a second JRPG renaissance, and now is the time. But first, let's have a word from our sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by Soulvars, an action-packed turn-based JRPG inspired by modern hits and classics from the 90s, such as Crosscode, Jack Move, Mega Man Battle Network, and those timeless Square Enix hits over on the SNES. Here, you'll be immersing yourself in a game that blends the best of two worlds: stylish pixel art animations and dynamic, turn-based tactical planning. With an intuitive deck-building combat system, you'll be collecting gear to expand your soul bits and personalize your deck so that you can mix and match all of them to uncover new attacks and unlock hundreds of different abilities. Each enemy is a puzzle to solve and a challenge to overcome, so be sure that you wishlist it and play the free Steam demo launching on June 19th, because it's only available for a limited time before the full console launch hits on June 27th for Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, and the Nintendo Switch. Links to the Steam page and the demo can be found in the video description. And now, with that, let's dive deep into these abandoned series that we need to revive. First up, the Phantasy Star series, spanning the Sega Master System all the way to the Sega Genesis. While many RPG series on this list lasted multiple console generations, Phantasy Star unfortunately came and went like the wind. The first game on the Master System introduced the Algo Star system, 4-party member combat, the planets, and first-person dungeon crawling. Thankfully though, they did drop that first-person crawl for the more traditional overhead view in the subsequent games. And then they upped the ante by adding twice as many party members and a much more fleshed out world and story. But the third game really dropped the ball, going the Swords and Sorcery medieval route, set not on planets but biospheres, and having the most irritating battle theme ever. The only good thing about it was the marriage mechanic, where you had a choice of which girl to marry, and depending on who you chose, you would have different offspring, who you would control in the next generation. But the fourth game is really where it hit its stride. It could rival any Final Fantasy on the SNES, with great characters, fun cartoony cutscenes, a return to the Algo Star system, and dungeons that don't want to make you pull your hair out. This was supposed to be the future of the series, but instead of them continuing on, they just dropped it when Genesis went out of style. But now that Sega is in Nintendo's pocket, they really should put a fifth game on the Switch to reboot the series. I swear it would just sell like hotcakes. Number 2, the Shining Force series, spanning the Sega Genesis to the Nintendo DS. Continuing our Sega theme, let's talk about their abandoned strategy RPG series. Developed by Camelot of Golden Sun, Beyond the Beyond, and Mario Sports fame, I think strategy and puzzles are really where they shine. Although the first two mainline games have been ported to like a million different systems, there are really only 3 mainline Shining Force games. The first 2 released on the Genesis, and the third released on the Sega Saturn, which then got chopped down and bastardized whenever it crossed over to the West. At its core, this is a strategy RPG in the same vein as something like Fire Emblem, but what I really do think that sets it apart is its Dragon Quest-like exploration between the battles. You're going to be going into temples, the overworld, towns and dungeons, and then talk to people, find hidden treasures, and purchase equipment, just like you would in any old traditional RPG. But whenever it comes to battling, it's all tactics all the time. And the parties aren't small either, consisting of all sorts of different units, each with their own different abilities. While the 2 Genesis games and that third Saturn game are really considered to be the pinnacle of the series, there's also Shining Force CD, which is a remake of the Game Gear games, most of which we never received over here, and which act to bridge the story of the first 2 games together. Unfortunately, the last game released was Shining Force Feather, and that was only on the Nintendo DS, and considering that the DS was hugely popular over here, it's really saying something that Sega never localized that one, and the series has remained abandoned since 2009. Number 3. the Luffy series, spanning the SNES to the Nintendo DS. It is still shocking to me that the Luffy series just faded into obscurity. Beginning as a Dragon Quest clone in the early 90s, no one saw the groundbreaking Smash sequel coming. They took the very basic formula from the first game and just completely evolved it into something fantastic. Turn-based combat is still there, but now party members come and go, much like Final Fantasy IV, and the world is massive and full of secrets. Most importantly, though, is that dungeon design, where they're filled with on-screen encounters and tons of brain-bending puzzles. So when the third game was released on the Game Boy Color, I was expecting more of that. But instead, they brought in random dungeons and a really strange twist to the combat system, where you actually fight with 9 characters at a time. The first 3 games constitute somewhat of a trilogy, recounting Maxim and his ancestors' fight against the Sinistrals. But the next 2 entries are side stories and a remake, both taking place in the world of Lufia 2 because, Lufia 2 was the best one. But what we really need here is a true Lufia 4 set 100 years after the events of Lufia 3 and continuing the unending struggle against those Sinistrals. Number 4. The Grandia series, spanning the PlayStation to the PlayStation 2. Grandia started off with a bang, but ended in a fizzle. The first game told a charming story about love, loss, and friendship between Justin, Sue, and Fina. Everyone was just so lovable you couldn't help but smile your entire way through, and the battle system was groundbreaking at the time. You saw everybody's attacks on a line, but if you used a powerful critical attack at the right time, you could actually cancel the enemy's attack. They also introduced skill and magic leveling at a time whenever things like that just weren't done. The second game on the PS2 took all the ideas of the first game and then added to them, telling a short, tight story about good versus evil, not to mention Ryuta's little love triangle with Lena and Millennia. Then the third game hit, which felt like it was just made by 2 different development teams because the first 10 hours are fantastic. You play as an inventor who wants to soar the skies and help the mysterious girl who walked into your life. Only once you leave that first island after about the first 10 hours or so, it turns into a generic save the girl garbage story. Then it all ended on a whimper with Grandia Extreme, which is just a boring ass dungeon crawler with next to no story. If these developers would just go back to the basics of what worked in the first 2 games, they could totally have a winner on their hands. And number 5, the Breath of Fire series, spanning the SNES to the PlayStation 2. I love a good turn-based RPG, and this series is not only one of the most unique, but also one of the best. Beginning on the SNES and introducing many recurring characters, as well as the war between the light and the dark dragons, it set the stage for what was to come. The second game really punched it up in the graphics department, the storyline, and the uniqueness between the characters. Then, the PlayStation gave, but also took away. It introduced one of the best stories in gaming and the best music, continuing the journey of Ryu, Nina, and the goddess Dis, as well as the history of the Brood. They did cut down the party members from 8 down to 6, and the large world map is also cut. But at the same time, they introduced the Master System, as well as the Examination System, for a lot more customizability between your characters. The fourth game tried to be a bit more unique, by changing up the battle system so that all 6 characters can fight together from the back row, assisting when necessary. And the graphical style changed too, from bright, vibrant colors to muted earth tones and pastels. And unfortunately here, they did ditch that world map wholesale, but they kept the amazing story intact, as Ryu is now one half of a whole, and your other half is Folu, the God Emperor from the Eastern Empire, who the West is at war with. Things seem to be going great for the 2 installments on the SNES, 2 more on the PlayStation 1, but then the PlayStation 2 hit, and they released a Gaiden. So now the whole franchise was turned on its head, and Breath of Fire was transformed into a dungeon crawler, featuring ugly graphics, boring characters, and all set underground. Everything that made the series so lovable was gone, and when those HD twins came out, there was just no hope for it. But now I do have hope for a revival since we are in a second JRPG renaissance. So that's it for 5 defunct series that do need to be revived. I have so many more great RPG series from the past that need revivals too, so look out for future parts in this series. And what franchises do you want to see a revival? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing from you. And if you like this video and want to join around the channel, please consider following me over on Twitter, supporting me on Patreon for exclusive videos and early access to my content, heading on over to Twitch for streaming fun, or coming on over to my Discord to chat and hang out. The links to them all can be found in the video description. This has been David, and if you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.